Tonight on Bridge City News, a shooting at the legislature in Edmonton yesterday forced the stoppage of the Assembly. Today is the International Day of Persons with Disabilities. BCN's Loris Alexander looks at those being honored for helping make our city more inclusive. And Alberta Premier Jason Kenney raised the issue of financial help for our province at the recent Council of the Federation in Toronto.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Robbins.
Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. The Alberta legislature was halted yesterday afternoon after a man allegedly shot and killed himself with a handgun. Edmonton police say the non-criminal incident took place around 3 p.m. on the steps of the legislature. The assembly was adjourned until 7:30 p.m. while police investigated. Premier Jason Kenney tweeted this: "Our hearts go out to the victim's family and loved ones. If you need help or know someone who does, please call the Alberta Mental Health Helpline at 1-877-303-2642. 5 students are in critical condition after a school bus and a truck-mounted crane collided on a highway near Smoky Lake, northeast of Edmonton, yesterday morning. Police say in total more than a dozen students were taken to hospital. The driver of the crane was also taken to hospital with minor injuries. Stars Air Ambulance said one student was airlifted to an Edmonton hospital. 2 others in critical condition were later transferred by air to also receive medical treatment. Today is International Day of Persons with Disabilities. Recognition of this day aims to increase awareness and understanding of persons with disabilities and the issues that impact their lives. BCN's Loris Alexander was at CASA earlier this morning, where the 5th Annual Lethbridge Inclusion Awards recognize those who make Lethbridge a more inclusive place for those with disabilities.
International Day of Persons with Disabilities is a United Nations Day that promotes the rights and well-being of people with disabilities.
The United Nations decreed for their agenda item for 2030 was leaving no one behind. And we believe that, in order for that to happen, we need empowerment, which is, giving people the authority and the power, to shape their own realities.
There's a lot of different committees all across Canada that put this together. We're not even the only one here in Alberta. But part of our event that makes us special is that we have the 5th Annual Lethbridge Inclusion Awards today. And so those awards are recognizing local community members for 5 different categories: the collaborator, the supporter, the champion, the Community Compassion Award.
We spoke with the winner of the Compassion Award and what drives her to work hard for her community.
I felt very humbled to be recognized in this way. I do the work because it needs to be done, because there's so many people out there that have the ability to advocate on their own behalf if they're given the opportunity. And I love that I am able to work with people that get an opportunity to actually speak up for themselves rather than other people always telling them what they're supposed to be doing.
The event also had panelists from the City of Lethbridge, the Lethbridge Diversity and Inclusion Alliance, and the YMCA about what they are doing for inclusivity.
Recreation is for everyone, no matter ability, no matter need. And so it's really important that the stakeholders and community members who are at today's event were able to hear about all the functions of our facility. We're growing. We're at 8,700 members now, seeing about 33 to 40,000 drop-in users a month. But we would like those numbers to increase. And if that means we're increasing individuals with disabilities into that mix and making them find a welcome home at the YMCA, coming and providing them information today was, no cost to us and no real strain on us to come here.
For Bridge City News, I'm Loris Alexander.
A special holiday remembrance program is taking place 7 o'clock tonight at the Martin Brothers Funeral Chapels. It's a chance to remember a special person in your life who passed away.
For many of us, this is the happiest season of the year, but for other people, it's the very saddest time of year. When people arrive this evening, they each receive a carnation. The carnation is a different color for the type of loss they've experienced. For instance, if you've lost a child, you get a white carnation. Therefore, you would find other people that have white carnations, and you would know then that they understand what you're going through. We invite you to come in, take a snowflake, and we will write the name of your loved one on the snowflake, and you get a chance to place it on the tree at the front of the chapel.
A presentation with holiday grief will be followed by a candle lighting ceremony in memory of loved ones. Dr. Paul Brownback is author of the book CEO of Your Life. He says the best way to lead a healthy life is to use your talents for God's glory and to be good stewards.
We are born into this life. God has given us resources, and we have a responsibility to God to use those resources to be productive to the maximum for Him. And there's no way to escape that. And especially when we become believers, God calls us as believers to be good stewards of the resources He's given us. So there's no way out of that. That's a responsibility either we can meet or not meet, but we can't escape it.
Catch the full interview with Dr. Brownback, author of CEO for Your Life, coming up after Business News. The annual Stuff a Bus campaign was on today to gather food and cash donations for the Lethbridge and Interfaith Food Banks. Lethbridge Transit also held their annual Food for Fares for the day. It's when all transit users can ride for free with a donation of a non-perishable food item.
The Stuff a Bus, we're working with the food banks, and the idea is that people bring donations and we try and fill a bus. And the second one, the Food for Fares, which was actually an idea that one of the transit operators had back in 2016, who suggested that we use food donations instead of cash for a ride. That was an initiative that was taken forward to the senior management team, who thought this was a great idea as to give back to the community. And so since 2016, we've done this one day a year with the two programs in conjunction with each other.
The public can drop off food or cash donations at both the North and West Lethbridge Save-On Foods between 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. daily. No cash donations will be accepted on transit buses. 2 Lethbridge Hurricanes are being recognized for their hard work and talent. Both Dylan Cousins and Kaylin Addison have been named to the World Junior Selection Camp. 17 forwards, 10 defensemen, and 4 goalies will battle for Team Canada roster spots December 9th through the 12th in Oakville, Ontario. The 2020 World Junior Hockey Championships begin Boxing Day in the Czech Republic. A former Saskatoon massage therapist has been sentenced to 4 years behind bars after pleading guilty to sexually assaulting 6 female clients. Mark Donlevy is already serving 3 years for sexually assaulting a woman in 2004. He will serve his new sentence consecutively. The court previously heard the victims came forward after hearing news reports last year about the earlier case. Donlevy apologized prior to being sentenced, saying it was never his intention to harm anyone. Canada's premiers agreed to press Ottawa for higher increases to healthcare funding, but most expressed hesitation about a national pharmacare program. The premiers also agreed to Alberta Premier Jason Kenney's request for a financial top-up to provincial governments suffering in economic downturns.
Albertans who have played an oversized role in the Canadian Federation, we are proud to have contributed $600 billion net to the rest of the Federation since 1960, and even during some really tough years where a lot of our people are out of work, losing their homes, that we have seen Albertans contributing net $20 billion a year plus to the rest of the country. So all we've asked for as an initial step is to lift this cap on the fiscal stabilization program. It basically gives us a little bit back of what we've put into the Federation every year. And we will put that money, if the federal government follows through and listens to this unanimous recommendation from Canada's premiers, we'll put those funds, which we paid into the federal system, to work with job creation programs in Alberta. So I'm just delighted.
Ontario's education minister says his government remains at the bargaining table with public high school teachers in hopes of avoiding a one-day strike tomorrow. Stephen Lecce says the main issue is compensation. The government recently passed legislation capping annual wage increases for public sector workers at 1% for the next 3 years. The union is asking for 2%. The teachers plan to walk off the job tomorrow in a bid to turn up the pressure during intense labor negotiations. U.S. President Donald Trump says Canada is slightly delinquent on defense spending, but otherwise gave our country a passing grade. The question came up during a meeting between Trump and Trudeau on the sidelines of a NATO summit. Canada spends around 1.3% on its GDP on defense and plans to increase spending to 1.4% by 2024-2025. That is when other NATO members agree to spend 2%. Trump also gave an update on the status of the new NAFTA agreement, otherwise known as the USMCA.
We look forward to being able to take the vote on USMCA. It's been there for a long time, and at some point, perhaps the president of Mexico, we have a wonderful man there, he really is. He's been a wonderful man. They'll get tired, and the prime minister will get tired. He'll say, look, let's forget this deal, and I could understand it if you did. It's been sitting in Congress now for 6 or 7 months, and it's a great deal for everybody. So hopefully they can get it done and get it done fast. And it's one of the few transactions I think all three countries benefit really as a unit against the world. If you look at it, it really is a unit against the world.
Yesterday, there were some increased tensions during a meeting between Trump and French President Emmanuel Macron. The topic of discussion was returning ISIS fighters.
Well, I haven't asked that to the president today. I have over the period of time. We have a tremendous amount of captured fighters, ISIS fighters, over in Syria. And they're all under lock and key. But many are from France, many are from Germany, many are from UK. They're mostly from Europe. And some of the countries are agreeing. I have not spoken to the president about that. Would you like some nice ISIS fighters?
Look,
I can give them
if you look at the situation,
you can take everyone you want.
Let's be serious. The very large number of fighters you have on the ground are ISIS fighters coming from Syria, from Iraq, and the region. It is true that you have foreign fighters coming from Europe, but this is a tiny minority of the overall problem we have in the region. And I think number one priority, because it's not yet finished, is to get rid of ISIS and these terrorist groups. This is our number one priority. And it's not yet done. I'm sorry to say that. Yes, you still have fighters in this region, in Syria and now in Iraq, and more and more. And the whole destabilization of the region makes the situation more difficult to fix the situation against ISIS.
Police in Wisconsin say an officer shot an armed male student at a suburban Milwaukee high school after the suspect pointed his gun at police officers.
At approximately 10:17 a.m., a student reported that a male student was reported to have brought a handgun to the school and was currently in possession of this handgun. The school's resource officer immediately responded to the classroom. The suspect would not remove his hands from his pocket and continued to ignore officers' commands. The suspect removed the handgun from his waistband and pointed it at the officers. An officer was forced to discharge his firearm, striking the suspect. Officers immediately provided life-saving medical attention. The remaining students were evacuated from the classroom and the school was put on lockdown.
Authorities in Michigan are seeking murder and other charges against a man they say shot 3 officers and killed a 22-year-old father after taking him hostage inside of his own home.
What we know is shortly after dispatch receiving 911 calls from the lady of the house telling us that her husband was downstairs with an unknown subject that had broke into the residence. She, at the direction of the husband and her own, took their child out of harm's way and hid themselves in another room in another part of the house. While on the scene, they heard a gunshot prior to a full SWAT call-out, and officers went into the residence to try to save lives. At this point, I'd like to add our condolences to the family of Christopher Ryan Lee Neal, who was a 22-year-old man who was doing nothing wrong.
An American citizen on the FBI's most wanted terrorist list has been charged with additional crimes involving ties to Somalia's al-Shabaab rebel group. The information was released through a federal indictment, which was unsealed yesterday.
Today we're here to ask the public's assistance, here and abroad, to report information leading to the capture of Jihad Sirwan Mustafa, one of the FBI's most wanted terrorists. We're also publicizing the reward offer of up to $5 million for information leading to Mustafa's arrest under the Rewards for Justice program in coordination with the Department of State. The FBI is requesting any information that could lead to the apprehension of Jihad Mustafa. This is Jihad Mustafa. Listen to his voice.
We would like to praise the continuous efforts of Harakat Shabab al-Mujahideen, who, while operating under extremely difficult circumstances, have made it their priority to help their Muslim brothers and sisters with exceptional dignity and grace, and have risen above the lies and deceit circulated by the hypocritical Western media.
Let me remind you, Mustafa has been implicated in the use of improvised explosive devices to commit violent acts in Somalia on behalf of al-Shabaab.
Many in London, England are still on edge following the recent stabbing on London Bridge. Our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari says the scary part about the recent terrorist attack is that the man who did the stabbing was a known terrorist who was released from prison.
You know, it seems like the moment any country, particularly in Europe, they let their hair down, they take a sigh of relief. There's another do-it-yourself type of terror attack. It was claimed by ISIS, and most importantly, this individual already served time for terrorism. I mean, let that sink in. He's a terrorist. Why was he roaming the streets? Why was he roaming the streets able to carry out another type of attack like this when all they need is a kitchen knife?
Well, Lisa will have more on terror movements in Europe and a story about how a recent gun battle in Mexico left 21 people dead. That's coming up in the second half of our show. A puppy, which is thought to be about 18,000 years old, was found preserved in permafrost in eastern Russia. The puppy was discovered in the summer of 2018 and is believed to be the oldest canine ever discovered in the area. It was found well preserved with fur, teeth, and even whiskers. Radiocarbon dating by Swedish scientists confirmed the puppy had been frozen for around 18,000 years. Now, I wonder what that is in puppy years. The snow in our region has been melting, and that trend will continue over the next couple of days. A complete look at the weather picture is coming up. We had lots of cloud cover again today. Tonight, mainly cloudy with a low near 3 degrees. Tomorrow, slight chance of rain mixed with snow and a high near 10 degrees. Thursday, a high pressure system returns, clearing out the clouds, and we should see a high of 3. Warming up quite a bit again on Friday. Blue sky, sunshine, and 10. Saturday, mainly sunny with a high near 8. Cooling off slightly on Sunday with the mercury dropping to 0. Monday, mainly sunny with a high near 6 degrees. Checking the almanac, the average high for this time of year is +1 and an average low of -10. The highest temperature on this date was recorded in 1988 at 14 degrees, and the record low, a very chilly -31 in 1972. Sunrise was at 8:09, sunset at 4:33. Looking at tomorrow's national forecast now, expect rain with a high of 7 degrees in Victoria, BC. Showers and 7 as well for Vancouver. A chance of flurries of -1 is on tap for Calgary on Wednesday. Periods of snow and -2 for Edmonton. A mixture of sun and cloud and -1 in Regina tomorrow. Overcast and -3 for Saskatoon. You should get up to the freezing mark under a mainly cloudy sky in Winnipeg tomorrow. Flurries and 2 degrees for both Toronto and Ottawa. Light snow and -1 for Montreal on Wednesday. In the Maritimes, Fredericton, New Brunswick had a snowfall warning today. Tomorrow, a mixture of sun and cloud and a high of +1. Expect light flurries and 2 degrees for Halifax, Nova Scotia. Charlottetown, PEI should also receive some snow and get up to 0. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, expect rain and a high near 8 degrees for tomorrow. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency canceled licenses of 3 companies tied to a massive meat recall. It affected 900 beef and veal products, and it stops the companies from slaughtering animals or preparing meat products. The agency canceled the Safe Food for Canadian licenses of Riding Regency Meatpackers and 2 others operating under St. Anne's Foods. Others are Canadian Select Meats and the Beef Boutique. All of the companies are based in Toronto. The companies are no longer allowed to slaughter animals or prepare meat products, including for export and to send to other provinces or territories. A fire has destroyed a slaughterhouse in central Alberta. Officials say the fire began Sunday evening at Family Meats in Ponoka. Fortunately, crews were able to save around 100 hogs. Fire Chief Dennis Jones says the blaze was not completely out until midday yesterday, with fuel and animal fat keeping the blaze going. He also says firefighters had to dodge exploding .22 caliber shells that started going off. CN Rail is estimating its 8-day strike by 3,200 workers that halted most rail shipments reduced earnings by about 15 cents per share. CN has cut its 2019 profit forecast for adjusted diluted earnings per share. The Montreal-based company says it continues to realign its resources, including its workforce, in light of weaker demand and the global economy that's slowing. That suggests it plans to go ahead with planned layoffs of around 1,600 employees, despite the backlog of freight and containers. The Bank of Montreal's fourth quarter profit was hit by a restructuring change. It was related to plans to lay off about 5% of its global workforce. It says profit fell to $1.19 billion from $1.7 billion a year ago. BMO did not reveal details about where or when the job cuts will occur. 5% of its workforce represents around 2,275 jobs and could include around 1,500 jobs here in Canada. The bank says it expects the initiatives announced today will provide annual savings of $200 million in fiscal 2020 and about $375 million by the first quarter of 2021. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 89 points on the day to 16,892. The Dow was down 280 points to 27,502. The S&P 500 was down almost 21 points to 3,093. The Nasdaq was down 47 points to 85.20. Oil was up 36 cents on the day to 56.32 per barrel. Natural gas was up 11 cents to $2.44. Gold was up 2 cents to $14.7766 per ounce. Silver was up a penny to $17.19 per ounce. Wheat is at $235 per metric ton. Barley's at $238. Canola's at $4.58, and corn is at $273 per metric ton. Live cattle were down 20 cents to $120.28. Feeder cattle were up 23 cents to $143.28. Lean hogs were up $2.15 on the day to $62.58. And the Canadian dollar was unchanged on the day at 75.22 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, 5 students are in critical condition after a school bus and a truck-mounted crane collided on a highway near Smoky Lake, northeast of Edmonton yesterday morning. Police say in total more than a dozen students were taken to hospital. The driver of the crane was also taken to hospital with minor injuries. Another gun battle involving drug cartels in Mexico has left 21 people dead. Is it still safe to travel to Mexico for a tropical holiday? Our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari gives us her thoughts next. But first, here's a look what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News Community Calendar. An annual City Hall tradition begins this week with the Sounds of the Season concert series. Enjoy your favorite holiday classics performed by various local choirs and bands during the weeks leading up to Christmas. Plus, take part in the Christmas Hope campaign by donating unwrapped toys, gifts, and non-perishable food items. For more information and performance times, visit lethbridge.ca. Come for a festive evening to Crossroads Counseling's Shine the Light Christmas celebration and fundraiser on Friday, December 6th, beginning at 6 p.m. at the Coast Lethbridge Hotel. Enjoy a full-course dinner, a silent auction, and live musical entertainment featuring the Freedom House Choir, Westside Choir, and the Evangelical Free Church Praise Choir. Tickets are $50 per person and can be purchased at the Crossroads Counseling Office. The YWCA Lethbridge and District's annual Stockings of Hope campaign is underway until Monday, December 16th. Each year, this initiative helps women in crisis experience the joy of the Christmas season by providing them with gifts and much-needed personal items. Residents and businesses can stop by the YWCA to adopt a stocking and fulfill a Christmas wish by purchasing some or all of the gifts on the list, then return the gifts unwrapped to the YWCA by December 16th. For more information about this worthy cause, call 403-329-0088. And that's your Bridge City News Community Calendar.
The White House declared in a fiery letter that U.S. President Donald Trump will not participate in the House Judiciary impeachment hearing. Joining me now to discuss this is our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari. Lisa, what can we expect in the next phase of the impeachment hearings?
A lot more of this ongoing circus of sorts. I always wonder what this looks like from an outsider's point of view, what the Canadians, for example, are looking at, Washington and what they're thinking about this ongoing kangaroo court that has been set up against the president here, regardless of what one's political affiliation is or what they have, what their emotional feelings towards Donald Trump is, because it seems like this president, regardless of policy, is just conjures up emotional feelings for or against him more than anything else. It really belittles the position of presidency, regardless of, again, what your partisan feelings are. In the next phase, on Wednesday, the Judiciary Committee will take a closer look at just the facts, just at whether or not this situation, the call with Ukraine, qualifies for impeachment. And according to that, they're going to have experts and lawyers come in who are who can attest to whether or not this violates any laws, and what the next steps will be to either refer him for impeachment or not. Of course, Donald Trump and those around him refuse to be there, first of all, for logistics, because they scheduled this knowing full well that Donald Trump would be in London for the NATO conference. And secondly, because they feel as though this is, again, a lack of respect for the president, and to bring him there would be really just setting him up for disastrous situation. So as someone watching this, both as an American citizen and as someone who's a journalist, it's upsetting. It's upsetting that this is what's focused on when there are so many important issues going on around the world, where our attention is needed, where our national security is concerned, where our assets are, and again, time and taxpayer money is going towards something that is just unbelievably a waste of time more than anything else.
Lisa, some news out of Iran, and that the government there says their missiles are aimed directly at 21 U.S. bases.
Yeah, that could help us sleep well at night, right? This is the Iranian regime flexing their muscles once again. Hal, as you and I have covered over the last few weeks, the ongoing protests in Iran, the people of Iran coming out onto the streets, burning tires, stopping traffic over what was called the catalyst being the price of gasoline. But of course, the people of Iran showing their disenchantment of 40 years of this rule more than anything else. And now every time this quiets down, the regime remembers that their main goal is to keep the people quiet, but then use that as a springboard into the region and to expand their influence, their hegemony, their Shiite dominance of the region. And that's exactly what they're doing here, saying that, you might think, talking to the United States, you might think that you're far away from us and we don't have access to you. But guess what? We're pointing our missiles at 21 of your bases and assets right here in the region in the Middle East. So we are, we have you covered, and we will threaten and we will act upon those threats. The same thing goes for Israel. They've always threatened the United States and Israel in the same breath, and they continue to do so. Here there was a video of a mullah, a minister of sorts, threatening the United States and Israel to take them off the map, to go after the U.S. assets in the region. More muscle flexing, more evidence and more proof that the Iranian regime is not going to be easy to deal with. And again, remember, there are people in the White House, there are employees in Washington who want to push forward another nuclear deal, knowing full well that this is the Iranian regime that we're dealing with. Just more threats, and every day it just gets worse.
Yeah, and still with the regime in Iran, they've warned that it may seriously reconsider its commitments to the UN atomic watchdog. Tell me more about that.
Right. So that's the only way that we've had any sort of responsibility or watching over their nuclear activities was the IAEA, and of course the Iranians have such a comfortable place at the UN, which is just so ironic, for lack of a better word, putting the Iranian regime on committees that have to deal with human rights and women's rights when that just doesn't exist in their vocabulary back at home, when we know full well what they're doing to the people of Iran, what they're doing in Iraq and Lebanon and Yemen, and the list goes on and on. So it's for them to say that we're going to pull out of our commitment to the only committee that has held them responsible for their nuclear agenda. They're going to pull out of it. That just shows exactly what they're up to, what their agenda is, how they hope to push forward. And again, the only saving grace the Iranian regime had, the only way they thought that they were going to make it through, was to count on the Europeans to bail them out. And when the Europeans found it very difficult to side with the Iranian regime, now they feel like they have to go at it alone. And what are they going to do? They're going to play tough, and they're going to pull out of any agency that's going to hold them responsible. They're going to make threats against the United States, against Israel, against the Europeans, and they're going to move forward from there.
The drug wars continue in Mexico, Lisa. A recent Mexican gun battle near the Texas border left 21 people dead. Is it getting to the point where we as tourists should potentially skip Mexico for our holidays?
That's what it looks like, and many of those threats have been issued, although people I know from the United States certainly make the trip down here in Southern California. Of course, it's the quickest trip to a nice warm destination, but again, these stories make people think twice. I don't know, these stories don't usually take place near the resorts, but there have been cases, especially near Cancun, where they are getting closer and closer to areas where tourists frequent. Now, that aside, if you've seen pictures of this police station where this gun battle took place, it looks like Swiss cheese. I mean, the building is riddled with gunshots, and where are these drug cartels getting these guns from? I mean, just this week, Donald Trump announced that he will label the drug cartels as terrorists. So they're going to be dealt with in the same way that terrorists are dealt with. They're on the national terror list at this point. And when you look at the reality of the situation just south of the border, it's amazing that half of this country feels like we don't need this type of protection at the border. They have guns, they have money, they have the agenda, and they have this violent way of dealing with situations just like terrorists do. And we don't have to look at the Middle East for terrorists. They're just at the foot of our country. I know that the Canadians look at this just as seriously as we do here in the United States, because they have a way of getting through and they have a way of climbing up and crossing into Canada as well. So yes, it looks very bad. This is just south of our border. This is right here in Mexico, where, as you said, many people have. I had my wedding in Mexico. I know a lot of people have their destination weddings. They have conferences in Mexico. They have weekend getaways in Mexico, honeymoons, etc. And we just had the story of the American family that was taken down in a very similar violent fashion.
Don't you think the Mexican government would kind of give their heads a shake, saying, this is a big part of our industry, tourism. We got to get this under control?
Absolutely, but it looks like it's going to get worse before it gets better in Mexico, and they want to go at it alone. They resent any sort of U.S. help, any sort of handout, any sort of commitment by Donald Trump to help them out. Just this week, they said that they want to be left alone to take care of this. And in a way, we know that the president is very serious about this, but then again, why not go forward? Canada, the United States, Mexico, this threesome, they need each other. It's not just economic. It has a lot to do with national security as well. And it behooves all three partners to look at this seriously, to help one another out, and to be on the same side when it comes to dealing with these terrorists. And it's exactly what they are. And when Donald Trump calls them terrorists, and you have people, half of this country, against fighting that concept of keeping us safe, it's upsetting. It's upsetting that we can't get on the same side and can't get on the same page to understand what we need to do to keep ourselves safe, to keep people who cross over into Mexico on vacation safe, to keep people north of our border safe. I think that there should be a task force just to deal with terrorism across these three borders.
Now, speaking of terrorism, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says 74 convicted terrorists released from prison will have license conditions reviewed. He vows to strengthen prison sentences following the recent London stabbings.
Yeah, so this stabbing story was very, very upsetting, not only because of the timing of the year, going into the holiday season, but also because, it seems like the moment any country, particularly in Europe, they let their hair down, they take a sigh of relief. There's another do-it-yourself type of terror attack. It was claimed by ISIS, and most importantly, this individual already served time for terrorism. I mean, let that sink in. He's a terrorist. Why was he roaming the streets? Why was he roaming the streets, able to carry out another type of attack like this, when all they need is a kitchen knife? And that's exactly the message that ISIS gives on YouTube videos, recruiting young people all over the world, particularly in Europe and the West, to use common items that you have in your home, in your kitchen, in your car. You use whatever you can to kill people, and no number is insignificant. They're not looking to carry out, a Al-Qaeda 9/11 type of attack. Even if you kill one person or two people, that's enough. And when you know that that's the agenda of these individuals, when you know that this particular individual carried out an attack and served time for it, why was it such an insignificant sentence where he was allowed to roam the streets once again? And that's exactly what Johnson saying, that now, should he be successful in the December election coming up in about a week or so, he will keep his promise and revisit these sentences and deal out much more significant sentences for individuals like this one.
Thousands of protesters have taken to the streets of Hong Kong in fresh protests after a week of victories. But Lisa, they're still pretty angry.
They're very angry, and I wonder if this has more to do with not just their own progress and their own victories. When the protesters have become more violent, they have gotten a better reaction, and that particularly coming from the United States. Donald Trump just last week signed a bill, offering support to the people of Hong Kong. They were playing the national anthem of the United States. They were praising. They had a protest, a march, I should say, just to thank Donald Trump, which is very interesting because you don't see any of that here in the West. He's much more popular, it seems like, in other parts of the world. But offering that hand and offering that support to the people of Hong Kong went a long way for the protesters. So they were invigorated by this. They became emboldened by this. And as we also see China diminishing in the conversation about a U.S. deal with China, I think that also empowers the people of Hong Kong to say, if there's any time to get what we want, or at least get the message across, this is the time to do so.
A horrific story coming out of India, Lisa. Reports say a veterinary doctor was gang raped and then her body was set on fire and dumped under a bridge. Horrific. And the charred body was found on the outskirts of a southern city. Hundreds of women have taken to the streets in protest.
Yes. The protests are about how women are treated, how the police department dealt with this, how society looks at a crime like this. This young woman, a very accomplished woman, a veterinary doctor, that was just leaving work, and these four men who were drunk and decided that they saw her and they decided that they would flatten her tire, point out that she has a flat tire. And what they did was then they gang raped her, they set her body on fire, they dumped the bodies. I mean, it's horrific what they did to her. And it seems like the police department didn't act fast enough. Once they found out that she was missing, they asked her family very, very inappropriate questions, such as, was she having an affair? Did she run off with someone? Blaming it on the woman. And these protests are about her case, but more so about how their society treats a case like this, or how the society treats violence against women, how the society treats, that femininity, the fact that she was raped and nothing was done about it, or there was no urgency to find these rapists. It's horrific, and I'm glad we're bringing some light and some attention onto this story, because I think so quickly we kind of go over these stories, and it's another country, that's just the way it is, that's how women are treated. But where's the outrage here in the West when we pride ourselves on being such champions of women's rights? And what are people here in the streets? When there's a women's march, here in the United States, or all over Europe, what do we talk about? We talk about things like birth control and abortion, and things that obviously are more of a case-by-case situation, and it should be really left up to each individual, or at least the state, not the nation. And here you have it. You have, how did their society deal with something like that? And not to compare, but it's just that we wish we had more champions of women's rights speaking out for these individuals and giving their plight a bigger and higher platform.
Lisa, a lot closer to home, a woman in Montreal who was arrested for not holding onto an escalator handrail has been awarded $20,000 in damages by the Supreme Court. Bella Crozian was riding the escalator at a metro station in 2009 when the officer stopped her because she wasn't holding onto the handrail. Tell me more about this bizarre case.
How funny. She must have had one bad afternoon in 2009, and a decade later she's gifted $20,000. I don't know, it might be worth her time to have gone through that. Basically, there is a warning sign that says, hold on to the rail. When she gets to the bottom, she's checking her handbag for something and wasn't holding on to the rail. And when she gets to the bottom of the escalator, a police officer says, you weren't holding on to the rail, you have to come with me. She refuses. They go back and forth. She's one tough cookie, it sounds like. Basically, she was then fined, not just for the not holding the handrail, but also for not complying with the police officer. And I guess it took her a decade to prove that this was not a law, but it was just a warning, and the police officer had no right to search her, to stop her, to question her, and to fine her. So she won the case. She actually, I think, sued for double that and a bit more, maybe $45,000 if I remember correctly, and she got half the amount. She was awarded that by a court, and now she can go back to wherever she was and do a little bit of shopping with that $20,000. It took a decade, but hey.
And make sure she holds onto the handrail when she's doing her shopping, right?
Sure. Yes.
Or not if you get $20,000, but we'll see. Buy a lot of shopping. That's right. Our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, joining me once again from Los Angeles. Thanks again, Lisa.
My pleasure.
You know, we only have one shot at this life. The reality is some people succeed while other people fail. What is it that makes the difference? Dr. Paul Brownback is author of How to Succeed as CEO of Your Life. Dr. Brownback, thanks a lot for joining us here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, Dr. Brownback, what inspired you to write this book, CEO of Your Life?
Well, I spent a lot of years, Hal, just drifting through life, not really focusing on being effective in what I did. And as a result, I wasted a lot of time, a lot of years, lost a lot of opportunity. And looking back, I just didn't want other people to have that experience. And so I wrote this book to help people to not make that mistake.
Now, you're right about that succeeding at life represents our most important objective. How would you define success?
Well, Jesus defined that for us. He gave us the first and second commandments, to love God and to love our neighbor. Then he gave us a new commandment, which tells us to love one another. So success is determined by showing agape to other people. And agape love is just seeking their best interest, seeking to benefit them. And as we maximize the production of agape with our life, that is what brings success. God created us to be agape producing organisms. That's our purpose. That's what he designed us to do. And as we fulfill that design, as we use our life to maximize that production of agape, then we will achieve success.
You know, some people say the real ideal of success is the fact, or by gauging success, is how many people finish with the most amount of toys.
Oh, yes.
You know, so how do you respond to that?
Yeah. Well, I've seen a lot of people finish that way, and they finish with a lot of misery, and they didn't leave behind a very great legacy. And as they look toward eternity, they don't have much there either.
Now, why do you say we cannot escape responsibility for our lives?
We are born into this life. God has given us resources, and we have a responsibility to God to use those resources to be productive to the maximum for him. And there's no way to escape that. And especially when we become believers, God calls us as believers to be good stewards of the resources he's given us. So there's no way out of that. That's a responsibility either we can meet or not meet, but we can't escape it.
Now, many of us have very crazy, busy lifestyles. I know a lot of young parents that are always out there taking their kids to hockey, you know, to figure skating, piano, guitar lessons, whatever, gymnastics. You refer to chaos as our default setting. Why do you think we're hardwired like that?
We find that principle in nature, actually. In physics, we have what's called the second law of thermodynamics. And that law just says that there's this quality called entropy that is always increasing. Now, entropy is just the physics term for chaos. And we find in the physical world, if you want chaos, all you have to do is nothing. Things will become chaotic all on their own. And we find the same thing in our own personal lives. The only thing you have to do to have chaos in your life is nothing. That's the default setting. That's what will occur unless we proactively manage our lives.
Now, human nature shows that we tend to be very selfish as a society. A lot of people say, look out for numero uno, number one. How can we really change that mindset, Doctor?
Well, first of all, we have to saturate ourselves with Scripture. We have to make sure we are have a mind that's filled with the truths of the Word of God. But so much of it has to do with our thought life. The Apostle Paul, Romans 12:2, says, "Be not conformed to this world, be transformed by the renewing of your mind." And it's the mind, and specifically not what we know, but what we think about. In Romans chapter 8, it says, the mind of the flesh is death, but the mind of the Spirit is life and peace. And the Greek word for mind there specifically is talking about our thoughts. And one of the interesting things about that passage is when we look at the literal translation, it says the mind of the flesh is death, the mind of the spirit is life and peace. It's really saying that we have two minds. And it's not even so much what we think about as which mind we're thinking with. Are we thinking with the spiritual mind? We're thinking through that carnal mind. And if we're thinking through that spiritual mind, it's going to direct us toward agape types of thoughts, which will translate into agape types of action.
Now, Dr. Brownback, I know many people who have been burned in the past from relationships, from employers, and that's why they say they're looking out for number one. What do you say to people like that?
Well, we can look at our past and we can have all kind of terrible experiences, and I'm sympathetic to that. People have gone through a lot, and yet the answer is not to be self-focused. That's just going to increase that person's negative experiences in life. Life doesn't work that way. God designed us to produce agape. If we live for number one, we're going to be miserable.
Now, you have an unusual take when it comes to the term unconditional love. You suggest that it may not be a biblical idea. Why is that?
Well, first of all, when people use the term, what they tend to be meaning is I should love people regardless of the way they treat me, and that's good. That's a biblical concept. But the term itself, unconditional love, the idea that we love unconditionally doesn't work, because every relationship demands conditions. Let's take marriage, for example. Marriage vows, in essence, are a list of conditions. You can't have a marriage if you don't have, for example, fidelity as a condition, or living together, or loving one another. These are essential conditions for marriage. There's a psychologist by the name of Carl Rogers who taught that we should have open marriage, which means you can have relationships with anybody you want. Well, it doesn't work, and what he ends up with is not what God would define as marriage. So today there's a lot of evangelical writing about the whole idea of boundaries. We have whole books written on boundaries. Well, when people write those books, what they're really talking about is conditions. Boundaries are really just conditions, and what they're really conveying is the acknowledgement that conditions are essential.
So why is morality so important to help our lives and society in general run smoother?
Well, because morality we might define as giving other people what we owe them, and unless we do that, we can't have a good relationship. You couldn't have a relationship with somebody who perpetually lies or steals. Just wouldn't work. And likewise with morality, if we don't maintain morality, society disintegrates.
You say it's wrong to extend grace at the expense of morality. Can you explain that?
Yeah, well, morality is our foundational responsibility. That's what we owe people. Grace is giving them something that we don't owe them. So we need to give people what we owe them before we start giving away what we don't owe people. If we don't pay the electric bill so that we can give to a homeless person, well, that sounds magnanimous, but if everybody did that, the power would go off, and everybody would suffer. So morality is the foundational aspect of life, and therefore must be maintained first.
You touched a little bit on agape earlier. Doctor, you talk about micro expressions of agape. Tell me more about that.
There's a great passage, 1 Corinthians 16:14. Let all that you do be done in love. That's a powerful passage. And in essence, what it's saying is that everything we do can either be done from an agape perspective or a selfish perspective. We can do one or the other, and that not only includes the big things in life, it includes the tiny little things. It says, let everything you do be done in love. So your wife gets up in the morning and you greet her and you can say, morning. Or you can be cheerful and say, good morning, how are you, sweetheart? And so just the way we talk to people, the little things we do for people. There's a story of, true story, Dr. Jerome Motto, who is a psychiatrist in the San Francisco Police Department. And there was a man that left his apartment one night and walked to the Golden Gate Bridge, climbed over the 4-foot embankment, and jumped to his death 200 and some feet below. Well, Dr. Motto went around to his apartment to see what he could learn, and there he found on his desk a note that he had written that said, I'm going to walk to the bridge. If one person smiles at me, I will not jump. And powerful. But we think of just the little things that we can do that can make all the difference in the life of another person.
I've heard that before too. You're right. You smile at somebody, pay them a compliment, a sincere compliment, you can really make their day.
Compliments are one of the great unused resources that we have. They cost nothing. They take no energy. They're actually fun to give. It's nice to be like, well, you look nice today, or well, that was a nice thing that you did, or whatever. It's a great resource, and we miss it by not using it more.
Many people today seem to lack good discernment. How is discernment cultivated?
Well, there's another great verse of scripture, 1 Corinthians 2:16, which ends by saying, but we have the mind of Christ. And as we saturate ourselves with scripture, we can develop that mind which will give us discernment to make the decisions that confront us. There's that little wristband, what would Jesus do? WWJD. And yet we have to ask, well, how do we determine that? And we determine that by saturating ourselves with scripture. And it's not so much memorizing some proof text when we are confronted with a situation of saying, well, what verse applies to this situation? But it's more of becoming so familiar with scripture that we can think the thoughts of Christ after him.
Do you think we tend to make decisions based more on feelings as opposed to using our intellect? In other words, go with our gut instead of our heads?
Well, it's not just a matter of going with our gut. Our culture today is so tremendously feelings oriented. That's the whole gist of contemporary culture. And so feelings have a tremendously powerful pull on people today. I counseled a woman. She came in first time I saw her, and she told me she had been living with this man and gave me all the reasons why that was a really bad idea and it wasn't working and he was taking advantage of her, and she was glad that she was out of that relationship. She was never going to do it again. The next time I saw her, she told me, well, I moved back in. She said, I saw this movie, and the movie conveyed the idea of follow your heart. And she said, my heart was just with moving back in with him and into that relationship. And so that's what she did. And to me, that just exemplifies our society today. Wherever our emotions take us, that's what we do. We unplug our brain and our will and let our emotions carry us with the tide of life.
Many people would agree, Doctor, that God has a specific role for us to play in life. Any thoughts how we can discover what that unique niche really is?
Well, first of all, we have to be proactive. We have to be intentional. And that gets down to really to the heart of the book. The need to be intentional in seeking what what God has for us. And then there's some steps that we can take. First of all, we need to take inventory of the resources God has given us, the capabilities He's given us, spiritual gifts, natural gifts. But above and beyond that, we have a whole lot of other resources. For example, being a citizen of a certain country gives us latitude that other people might not have. The languages we know, the degrees that we have, the network of friends that we have, and so forth. So take inventory of all those things, and then look at those opportunities and see where we can best plug in those resources. I've seen Christians who seeking God's will, and they just spend all this time in prayer, which is a great idea, but they never do any research on what opportunities are out there and available to me that might fit my package of resources. So we need to discover the package of resources, then we need to look for opportunities, and then we need to spend a lot of prayer to discern where those resources, what particular opportunity where they fit the best.
Dr. Paul Brownback is author of How to Succeed as CEO of Your Life. Thanks a lot for joining me today from North Carolina.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it, Hal.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.